I think from day one, we always needed to speak out. But initially, there was some leeway given because obviously this is a situation that we've never really faced before on a global basis. So you get that there's a learning curve involved, even for government. But now, 20 months in, I think we all need to be speaking out a bit more because it's absolute insanity to think that we can continue to operate with this much uncertainty.
Okay, so like a roadmap.
Well, it's painful, isn't it? Watching the rest of the world move on when you have zero certainty about when you're going to be able to start to operate again, particularly for those industries we've just talked about. It's just bonkers. We need something, and we need it now.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because all of that started to happen here in Australia 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. And as soon as that happened, you know, we've got a media side to what we do as well of events. And as soon as that happened, venues, destinations, bureaus, they all started to contact us to say, okay, not much is going to be happening up until the end of this year, but at least we've got some kind of certainty that something's going to be happening through the new year. So we can plan for it and we can start to promote and work to that particular date. But you're not even there yet in New Zealand, are you?
No. And this morning, it was even more painful because there was an article that came out in Stuff magazine, and I don't know if you would have seen it, but it was around they're starting to potentially say that Auckland is going to stay in lockdown over Christmas and summer, and they're going to allocate different sections of people time slots to be able to leave Auckland for Christmas.
Crikey. I mean, that's dystopian, isn't it? That's
the mere thought of that is really quite frightening, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, where's the where do you, because you're on a few boards and industry groups and that kind of thing. So where does government sit with regards to sort of consultation to the groups that you're on, for example? I mean, well, is there any dialogue?
We've had a few meetings. I wouldn't say that consultation has been the process that they've followed in any way, shape or form. What tends to happen is, for example, we'll have a meeting with BIATA, so the Backpacker and Youth Adventure Travel Association will have a meeting with Stuart Nash, and they'll be discussing vaccine certificates. The government will basically just tell you what their direction is. They appear to take the feedback on board, but then nothing gets done. Yeah. Same with the vaccine mandates. So we've had it mandated now across about 40% of our population in terms of industry. Yeah. But there's still no real directive for tourism or events in terms of how we're going to manage those elements once COVID is once we open up and we can come back to some form of normality. All they've said so far is, and it hasn't been a consultation, it's basically just been we're going to be accepting vaccine certificates if you want to go to restaurants and bars. If your business chooses not to partake, then you will be no longer eligible for any business support or government support.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
mandating without mandating.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to come back to that in a minute because that's something that's a separate issue in itself. But you know, this if you look to what she's done so far, or what the government there have done so far, the targets that the population has been provided with are very certain. You know, you've got this has got to happen and that's got to happen and 90%. But I don't see any targets for government in terms of timeframes or any kind of commitment. And I'm just wondering how you know, because when you get to your 90% or whatever it is there a time limit on that? What's the government's view on how long that should take before bad things start to happen?
Yeah, we don't know. Well, the sad fact is not that bad things are starting to happen, but people are now starting to push back, and people are getting incredibly angry. The 90% target for the big cities, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, you'll hit those, no problems. But where I live up here in Northland, that certainly will not be feasible. Rotorua, one of our most prominent tourism destinations, it will not happen there. There's a lot of regions where 90% across those district health boards just won't happen. I mean, you can push all you want for Māori and Pacific vaccination rates to increase, but the fact of the matter is people will make their own choice. You're not going to coerce them, and they're not giving a good enough incentive. I think if they said, if we reach 90%, we'll open up the borders and we'll, kind of get on with normal life, it actually gives people an incentive to get vaccinated. But at the moment, what's happening is I've been vaccinated since the beginning of September to no benefit whatsoever to me. And the same for 75% of the rest of New Zealand of eligible population that is now vaccinated. There's no benefit for us.
So what happens then, Eve? I mean, when you get to 90% vaccinated, let's say it will happen. What actually happens then? Do you go back to normal? I mean, is it all? So
what we've been told will happen when we reach 90% vaccinations is it will move away from national level lockdowns and we'll move into this traffic light system, which quite frankly is one of the most confusing things you've ever laid eyes on.
Yeah.
But what's become quite apparent throughout this process is that whilst national lockdowns won't be used, they've still said that regional lockdowns will be potentially used to control spread of COVID. So really, nobody can really see a benefit to reaching 90% because it doesn't seem like we'll get any additional freedoms. There's been no discussions on domestic borders as yet, and there's been no discussion on international. So at the moment, I don't think anybody really knows what that looks like.
So right now then, even as it stands at the moment, even if you reach 90%, which is highly unlikely to happen, of the eligible population, which is what, from 12 onwards or 20 onwards, or
12 at the moment.
12. Okay. Yeah. If that happens, which you believe is highly unlikely, there's still no certainty as to when all of these restrictions get repealed on international travel, or even regional restrictions.
They have alluded to making an announcement on the 29th of November, which will be around potentially opening up Auckland, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be allowed to travel domestically. So no, there's been no information around even domestic travel pre-Christmas.
Okay, so what is there an end game for New Zealand? I mean, has there been an announced end game, or
No, nothing. I know the original plan obviously was the elimination, and we know that strategy is now gone. Yeah. So they have moved from eliminating COVID to now more of a management and containment program by the look of it. But end game, I mean, no, we've had no clue as to what that end game is. And if, in my view, if the whole point of this, which is something Jacinda said last year, I think in April or May, so first lockdown, her narrative was, we're doing this because we only have 189, I think, ICU beds across the whole country. So we're doing it so that we don't overwhelm our health system. But what have they done between then and now? We've had 100 COVID-free days in between then, and we've been one of the only countries in the OECD to have those. But what have they done with those days? Nothing. They haven't done anything. What they should have been doing was upskilling, training, making immigration changes to get doctors and nurses in, purchasing new equipment for hospitals. But instead, now what they've done is just they've doubled the Resurgence business package, which is great for us. But I know personally, running two businesses, and I know many other people that would rather be given the chance to operate. And then let's put the 940 million a fortnight being given to businesses into our healthcare system to make sure that it can cope with COVID, because let's face it, it's inevitable.
I mean, you're not in the benefits business, are you? You're not running a business so that you can get benefits. You're running a business to run a business.
No.
So nothing, as far as you can see, has been done to upgrade or provide increased capacity for health.
No,
Right.
not at all. And I think the most frustrating thing throughout this whole process is that was the whole narrative in the first place in terms of the health system. So why have they not used the last 20 months to do something about that? That just doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. I'd much rather be given a chance to operate and give that nearly 1 billion a fortnight to healthcare. 100%.
So yeah, billion a fortnight.
Nearly, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of bringing this back to sort of tourism, destination marketing, events, that kind of thing, where do you stand? Where do you all stand over there in terms of consulting government and speaking, trying to get some dialogue going? Or is everybody going, there's no point, forget it, and just waiting to see what happens?
It's initially, we had quite a few meetings with various people within government, not just Labour, but also national as well. So we did have various meetings in the beginning, I would say between kind of March and July 2020. In recent months, obviously the associations, TIA, Business Events Industry, Aotearoa and TNZ, etc., have done lots of lobbying to government. Yeah. But it's become quite clear, and I can't speak for everybody else, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people would agree with me, that Stuart Nash, our tourism minister, whilst he is much better than his predecessor, he's obviously being given a directive from above. So we're not getting any information from him whatsoever, particularly not around borders. It's become quite clear that he's not interested in discussing that at all.
Right. I mean, and I think that press release that Lisa Hopkins sent out a couple of months ago, when all these lockdowns started again, you know, she was basically saying, you know, we don't want a kiss and a cuddle. We want some proper, practical support. But from what you're saying, that's kind of fallen on deaf ears, and you've been lumped in with everybody else that needs basically a handout.
Yeah, exactly. And do you know what? Whilst support is nice, like Lisa says, we don't want it. We want to be given the practical tools in order to move forward and just learn to live with COVID. But instead, what's happening is, instead of doing what they're there to do, legislate, regulate, make it easier for businesses to operate, they're passing the hot potato to us to make decisions on vaccine mandates and vaccine certificates. It's crazy. They're actually making our lives more difficult, not easier.
And I mean, I don't know if any of your clients are government related, or whether you rely on sort of cooperation with government to run your business at all. But you know, you're quite relaxed about speaking out and saying what you think. So you're not worried about losing any clients at all then?
We don't have any government clients. And the reality is, whilst some people, it might be polarizing to some, but it's reality. This is the reality that we're going through every day, and we've been going through for near on 20 months. So people either like it or they don't, but recently it's definitely been more supportive than negative, and it probably has been since the day one, actually, to be honest. But no, we don't rely on any government work. So yeah.
So you're quite happy to speak out then and speak plainly.
Somebody has to. I think from day one, we always needed to speak out. But initially, there was some leeway given, because obviously this is a situation that we've never really faced before on a global basis. So you get that there's a learning curve involved, even for government. But now, 20 months in, I think we all need to be speaking out a bit more, because it's absolute insanity to think that we can continue to operate with this much uncertainty. The businesses that have made it this far and the people that have been vaccinated need to be rewarded with benefit in some way or other. Like, we've obviously managed our business well enough to survive for 20 months with very little revenue. And as individuals, we've made the choice to go and get vaccinated. So let us move on with our life. And more people have been emailing me and messaging me saying, thanks for speaking out. More people need to be doing it. And a lot just don't, but we have to. Otherwise, it is never going to end.
No, it'll go on. It'll go on forever. And the thing is now Australia is opening up. You know, I would say that New Zealand did a fantastic job marketing itself as a destination 15 years ago and has been doing so ever since, and successfully competed against regions in Australia as a desirable alternative destination. Yeah. But I mean, you think you're actually starting to lose business to Australia now?
Oh, we absolutely are. So we've done a great job for years on marketing New Zealand. And even with the initial COVID response, we were all supportive of that because we knew it was what needed to be done. And we positioned New Zealand as a world leader in terms of COVID. And now, unfortunately, we've turned into the laughingstock because everybody's moving on without us. And we're sat here with, well, when you compare us to the UK, you're getting 50,000 cases a day. And I know they're incomparable because of, you know, landmass and population and whatever, but we're getting 100 and we've basically locked down the whole country without letting people travel anywhere. So yeah, we have become a bit of a laughingstock, unfortunately. And even if we had a plan, even if it was March, April, and she said, we're going to start opening international borders from the 1st of March, this is who's going to come first, this is what's going to be required. So we could plan, that would be good. But now what's happening, unfortunately, is because we have no plan, my clients, and certainly I know other businesses' clients in events and tourism, are starting to email to say, what is going on? We've got this locked in for March, April 2022, but I think we're going to cancel and we're going to move to somewhere that's going to be more viable. And unfortunately, that is Australia. And don't get me wrong, I love Australia, but it's a massive shame. And we've made that shift and we are losing ground very quickly now.
Well, I mean, I think Australia was in the same position 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. Yeah. Absolutely. The coverage Australia was getting internationally was not good. But as soon as that, you know, the announcements started coming through, particularly from New South Wales, it made a complete difference. But New Zealand, you're still in the changing rooms. You know, you're not even off the starters. You haven't even reached the track yet, have you?
No, it's actually heartbreaking to watch because we had such a massive build-up of business over maybe not the last 3 or 4 months. It's gone a bit quiet, but prior to that, pipelines were looking really strong across the industry for lots of different businesses. And now, unfortunately, we're starting to see that drop because we have no plan, and it's really heartbreaking.
What about this this business? I mean, and this got international coverage as well. A reporter very politely asked Jacinda Ardern, you know, I'm sure you don't mean it like this, but with these vaxxed and unvaxxed, you're going to end up with a two-tier apartheid society. And she kind of nodded her head and smiled and very confidently said, That's exactly what I mean. That's exactly what it is.
I saw that.
Do you think she regrets it? I mean, no. Where does that leave? Where does that leave? I mean, where does that leave tourism and hospitality and events in particular? Where I mean, how do you deal with that?
It's tough because I don't think she regrets it at all. I think she's a very clever woman and she knows exactly what she's doing. She likes to pertain that she's empathetic and kind, but unfortunately there's nothing kind or empathetic about the situation we're dealing with at the moment. To be honest, our industry, we're still trying to remain optimistic and feel hopeful, and I'm sure the same for people in events, but there's only so much positivity you can inject where there is no hope. And at the moment I'm getting loads of messages from people just this week and last week that have been basically, they're just losing their mind now. They're angry, They want a plan, but all they can see at the moment, is that we're being divided into vaccinated and unvaccinated. And in my view, what's happening is the government are using the vaccinated as a witch hunt pack, I guess, to back a minority into a corner. And in my view, that's not okay. It really isn't.
No, I mean, let's take the business side out of it. Just from an ethical point of view, I agree entirely. And I have to say, I heard her say yesterday, I think it was, or maybe even today, look, there are a minority, a very small minority, who don't agree in the vax. If it's that small, what's the issue? But even putting that aside for one moment, there's some serious business concerns with having that kind of approach, because effectively it looks to me like you're going to be expected to police this vaccinated, unvaccinated two-tier society as a business owner. And how does that work? Particularly with these COVID certificate, what is it, a COVID certificate program? Or
a COVID vaccine certificate, or a CVC. So
right.
How it's working at the moment is that I guess they've mandated in a way for hospitality, restaurants, bars, etc. But they have also said that if you don't want to participate in the CVC program, then you'll just no longer be eligible for any future business support through government.
Right.
So they're effectively mandating without mandating. However, there's certain scenarios where I think they've made it compulsory. So restaurants and bars, for example, I believe have been made compulsory. But then on the other hand, accommodations haven't been made compulsory, but a lot of accommodations have restaurants and bars inside. So it's really confusing. But yeah, like we're discussing, they've passed that on to the business. I mean, we personally put a protocol in place to vaccinated customers, to accept vaccinated customers. And unvaccinated customers just won't be able to travel unless they're medically exempt and can provide a medical certificate and a negative test. But I think it's going to impact really negatively on events, restaurants, bars. And the reason I'm thinking that is because you can't just exclude a section of society from participating in life. You can't. And it's going to create, sadly, it's going to create violence. And events professionals and coordinators are not paid enough for that. Neither are barmen or hospitality waiters and waitresses. And are we expected to then employ someone specifically just to check vaccine certificates? There's so many different variables that I don't think they've considered. And again, a lack of consultation is quite evident.
Well, I mean, the other thing as well with something like that is that presumably everybody, if there is, when that recovery happens, you're all going to be understaffed in one way, shape or form. I mean, an understatement. And you're going to be in terms of skill sets, you're going to be lacking with certain skill sets because you're going to be recruiting people that aren't necessarily skilled. So you are expected to manage a recovery, and recovery is always harder. It's always harder to get to the top than being at the top. So that's hard work. You've got to manage a recovery, but you've got to do it with less staff. And, I know in hospitality, if you're making 10%, that's a lot. If 20% of your client base isn't there anymore, because for whatever reason, either they don't agree with COVID vaccines, or they're just bloody minded and they're thinking, well, sod you, I'm not going to have a vaccine. I'm not going to be told what to do, or I'm not going to show my medical history to anybody.
Yeah.
You're trying to deal with a recovery with one arm tied behind your back, and then, okay, you're working on 10%, but you're going to lose 20% of your custom. I mean, I can't see how practically that can be managed.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work, particularly for those sectors that are really customer facing. So hospitality, accommodations, tourism, events. Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's super complicated. But of course, with this whole process as well, though, this isn't just a case of vax versus anti-vax. There's this whole group of people in the middle that just wanted to be given a bit of time to check data, to see which one was most efficient, had the most efficacy, and they're not being given that time. So they're having their freedom of choice taken away, and they're not going to be able to have a life. Like, it's just bonkers.
So, and how many what types of vaccines do you have available to you in New Zealand?
Oh, we've just got Pfizer here at the moment. So I believe so, yeah. We've just put an order in for another 4.7 million, I believe, that's going to be here in 2022, which also will include a number for 5 to 12-year-olds once that gets approved. Wow. I did hear a while back that we potentially would be getting Novavax and J&J as well, but I'm not 100% certain on that. But I mean, who knows? Pfizer seems to be the key partnership that the government have at the moment.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, your position now, Eve, I mean, I guess it started from a sort of a business logic point of view. But I mean, it sounds to me like you're sort of now drifting over to an ethical argument, or are the two one and the same thing for you?
They marry together, really. And also what you've got to think about from an ethical perspective is how many communities and people around the world are not actually going to have access to this without serious help from charities like UNICEF and businesses potentially funding those charities as well and donating. There's going to be so many people that are just, they're just going to be left behind because they're either unable to access or they don't want to have a vaccination. And I just think it's bonkers. I think we're opening ourselves up to major legal issues in the next year or two.
Have there been any yet? I mean, any legal challenges to this?
There have been some legal challenges, but only from those that work in essential services at the moment. So we haven't actually had it tested from a general business that has implemented vaccine mandates or vaccine certificate mandates yet. But I think we'll start to see them trickling through now. I mean, I know people that have got staff in their businesses that they don't want to be vaccinated, but they want to work in tourism. So either we have to try and find them a role that isn't customer facing, or they're out on their ear if we mandate vaccines. We haven't mandated at the moment because, in my view, it shouldn't be my job. I've already got a big enough job trying to general manage 2 businesses, let alone trying to think about legal ramifications of vaccines. And that is what government is there for. They're there for the democratic process, for the legislation and the regulation in order to help individuals and businesses with everyday life. And they're not doing it. They're passing it to us to make the decision. And that is just, it makes me angry.
Well, I told you, my wife, I recorded when we last spoke, and because I was transcribing it, and she came into the room just as you were describing that in another more colourful way. And I think she said, I like her. So
yeah,
quite interesting. So I mean, basically everything at the moment, what you're pointing to is not good news for the Australian events business, the New Zealand events business, but it's pretty bloody good news for Australian destinations and Australian events. Yeah, which is pretty painful for us, to be honest. And don't get me wrong, we're happy for Australia to be moving on and getting ahead, but it just highlights to us how far behind we are. Even looking at, I think it was yesterday morning, just watching that first flight from Los Angeles touchdown in Sydney at 6 o'clock. It was heartwarming for me, but also heartbreaking to know that we have got no end to this right now.